Hey guys, how's it gaming? I'm Fill in the Blanks, and Final Fantasy VII Remake is almost out. It is going to be out April 10th, and I just can't wait. They announced it in 2015, and I've been sitting here going, is it going to be good? Is it not going to be good? And everything they've been showing for the last about year or so has been phenomenal, and I can't wait. JRPGs mean a lot to me. I've been playing them since I was about 13 or so, when Mario RPG kind of finally caught my eye. I hesitated at first because I didn't like RPGs, but I loved Mario, so I tried it out, and while I did enjoy the Mario aspect, I wasn't a big fan of the RPG stuff. Then a buddy of mine, Alex, lent me Chrono Trigger, and again, I really liked the story. I liked that a lot. I was so surprised that games could have coherent stories like this, because I wasn't super used to it, playing only like platformers and like Mega Man and stuff all the time. But I still sucked so bad at the game that I actually had to start the game over again because I was so under-leveled at a specific point of the game. It wasn't until him and I went through Final Fantasy VI on co-op mode, and yes, there is a co-op mode in Final Fantasy VI if you didn't know that, where I finally got to understand how RPGs work, how you had to think, how you had to strategize. And ever since then, I just wanted to devour every JRPG I could find. I used to emulate so many NES and SNES RPGs that I missed growing up, and Final Fantasy quickly became one of my absolute favorite franchises in that genre. So, to celebrate FF7's upcoming release, I am counting down my top 10 favorite mainline Final Fantasy games. That is only 1 through 15, so none of the spin-offs or sequels. I mean, there's so many of them out there, and they range so wildly in quality that they deserve their own top 10 sooner or later. Quick note, I have never played Final Fantasy XI or Final Fantasy XIV. I'd like to, but I'm not a huge MMO guy. One day I will try them out, so they're not on this list. Also, I haven't played 15 all the way through. I only played a couple hours in, so it's not fair for me to judge the game at this point. So this does not include 11, 14, or 15. Secondly, this is my top 10 favorites list, not the top 10 best list. Favorite and best mean two completely different things. So if my list is different than yours, then hooray! It means we think differently, and that doesn't mean we can't still be friends. And lastly, put your guess for what my top Final Fantasy game is in the comments. I love hearing what you guys think my top is going to be. It's always kind of fun. Though this one I think is a little obvious because I talk about it a decent amount in my Let's Plays. By the way, there are going to be spoilers here. Anyways, let's get on with it. These are my top 10 favorite Final Fantasy games. Number 10. I think every Final Fantasy game has enough to like about them that they're worth playing. But Final Fantasy XIII grazes that line a little too close for comfort, in my opinion. I wouldn't straight up say I dislike Final Fantasy XIII, but there is a lot I dislike about it. It has an awful story, a world that makes super little sense if you don't read its glossary of terms that it throws at you every couple seconds, boring characters that I just find super frustrating. The only character I like in this game is Saz, and an incredibly linear path throughout the entire game. Which is weird because normally I really like linearity, but man, FF13 really pushes it here. What I can say that I like about the game is it's absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. It's simply gorgeous. Ever since they showed it off way back in I think 2006 to its release in 2009, I can't believe how gorgeous this game is. And weirdly enough, and this is going to be somewhat different than you're going to hear from most people, I actually really like the battle system. Sure, it takes away a lot of agency from the player, it just rips it away, and you have very little choices of what to do, but for some reason I really enjoyed playing with that battle system. I find as the game went on, it got pretty cool, pretty in-depth. I really enjoyed it. So as much as I kind of gripe about this game, I've played it completely through a few times. I've nearly platinumed it. The only thing I'm missing is the get every single weapon and item in the game, because I find the weapon crafting system makes like zero sense in this game. I won't keep going because I don't want to piss anyone off, because I know this is going to be a few people's favorites, but no, FF13 is definitely low on this list. Number 9. Another Final Fantasy that wasn't really well remembered when it first came out, but seems to be climbing in ranks for a lot of people, is Final Fantasy XII. Final Fantasy XII is kind of one of the weird misfit Final Fantasies. It's definitely not remembered super well like a lot of the other Final Fantasy games are, and I think one of the reasons why is because it has a very meandering story that doesn't really do a whole lot, and not just that, but it also has one of the worst main characters in Final Fantasy history. I hate Vaughn. I don't think I've met a single person who genuinely thinks Vaughn is a good character. He's not even the main character of the game. Ash is the main character of the game. Most of the stuff that happens in the game is about her. So it's super weird that Vaughn is just kind of there and he's your main character. Mind you, you can play as anyone you want, so if you really want Ash to be the main character of the gameplay, then you totally can do that. If you think it's Balthier or if you think it's Bosch, then go for it. But what this game gets so right, is its style. Its gameplay style is so great. I love the gambit system. I love how you can kind of manipulate your party's AI and kind of play around like that. It's super, super fun and super intriguing. The license board is super fun as well. This game plays closer to a single-player MMORPG than it does a traditional Final Fantasy game, and that was super interesting to me, and I absolutely adored it. It also has just incredibly gorgeous graphics for the PlayStation 2. I cannot believe this runs on the PS2. It's really just down this low because it has a forgettable story, but it's still absolutely worth playing, in my opinion, to this day. Number 8. Final Fantasy V is probably the one I think that jumps around the most on this list. It's back in the day when only 1 through 10 was available, I would have said 5 is definitely a lower Final Fantasy game, and it's starting to go up there. 5's mechanics are so good. I still say, other than maybe Final Fantasy Tactics, it's the best Final Fantasy game with a job system. Again, I haven't played 11 and 14, so they might have done it much better, but I haven't played them yet. But 5's was simplistic enough that anyone could understand it, and complex enough that you can break the game if you know what you're doing. Just fantastic. There's all sorts of jobs, almost all of them are useful. The only thing that brings this game down for me is its story a little bit, and that's because it's a little too comedic. A lot of very dramatic and poignant things happen in this game. There's a lot of death, a lot of things that are really morbid happen, but the game plays a lot of it off for laughs, and this is the comedy Final Fantasy game out of all the Final Fantasy games. So I found that a little off-putting the first couple times I played it, but I've really come to like that about it now, which is kind of weird. It's also one of those games where there's not a really definitive way to play this game. The original version was for the Super Famicom. It never came out in North America. I have a copy and I play it patched. That's the way I play this game. There was the PlayStation, I think it's Final Fantasy Chronicles version of it, which was on PlayStation with Final Fantasy VI, but it suffers from garbage load times and just a god-awful translation. We're on PlayStation, we can swear for no reason, and just it's bad. It's a bad translation, and I really don't recommend you play it. And then there's the Game Boy Advance version, which fixes the translation problem, but it's not a very well-programmed game. And then you have the crappy iOS one that keeps the good translation, but it's terrible on your phone. So there's not a really definitive version to play this game, but if I had to choose one, if you had to play, I guess it's the Steam, I think it's on Steam/mobile version, because then at least you have it on you all the time. It's at least closer to HD. It's just got ugly character sprites. I really wish they had done Final Fantasy V on the PSP the way that 1, 2, and 4 got a re-release on, but we never got it. According to the Square people, they did say a few years ago that now that Final Fantasy VII is getting a full-on remake, 5 and 6 were, they were denied a full remake, so he'd like to go back and do that. I have no idea if that's still their plan or not, but 5 deserves a remake. They all deserve remakes. They're all good games. But yeah, 5, go out and play it if you haven't. I just be very careful of which version you play. I hope it doesn't muddy your view of the game. Number 7. Final Fantasy IX used to be really high on my list, and it's slowly starting to go down as I'm appreciating the other games in the series a little bit more. And not because Final Fantasy IX isn't a good game, it's actually just great. It does have a few problems that I'll get into in a bit, but overall, Final Fantasy IX is supposed to be this throwback to classic Final Fantasy, and for the most part it pulls it off quite nicely. It ditches the futuristic and modern trend of 7 and 8 and goes for its own classic feel. A lot about this world really feels like an old 80s anime or something, what with the anthropomorphic characters and just kind of different look for everything, but it lends itself well to a fantastical world that is really, really well done. I think that's what the highest point of Final Fantasy IX is. Its world, its visuals, its music, everything lends itself to this world super well. and the characters, for the most part, do as well. Zidane is a great main character, and he's so different from Squall and Cloud before him, and he really lightens the mood and has his own kind of arc and his problems and stuff, but he doesn't like wallow in them like the other two characters do. The rest of the supporting cast is hit or miss. Vivi, Steiner, Garnet, even Freya, they're just great, but yeah, the other ones, Amarant, Kina, Eiko, they're not super great. Eiko at least has something to do with the story, but like Kina and Amarant, they're just kind of there. Even Freya's not super important compared to some of the other characters. It's sort of weird how there's very much like these 4 major main characters, and then there's like kind of 4 others that aren't super important. It's sort of weird in that sense, but whatever. Choose who you like in your party, and there you go, you have a good time. The overall story feels a little bit more personal than some of the other Final Fantasy games too, which is really nice. And there's, unfortunately, this trend that a lot of Final Fantasies seem to do, where the main character is not really the main character of the story. Zidane does have a lot to do with what's going to be happening in Final Fantasy IX, but Garnet's the main character. Like, a lot of this is about her. So it's kind of weird how so many of the games, they tend to just do that for Final Fantasy games, but whatever. The story is very good, but the main problem in this game is its pacing. There's a lot of times in the game where there's an hour or 2 of the story, and it's just like you want to do something else, and then all of a sudden there's like 3 major dungeons right in a row, and you're like, I just need a little bit of a breather from this. And that goes in the battles too. The battles are really slow, and I don't know why that is. There's almost no point to an ATB bar in this game because of how slow the animations for all the characters and how long it takes for them to do anything. By the time they do anything other than regularly attack, everyone else's ATB bar is already filled up. And the game actually relies a lot on counterattacks and little hidden mechanics to make the enemies kind of go before you in a lot of ways. It's really weird, but that's my biggest problem with the game, really, is that kind of battle pacing, because it makes the game feel a lot longer than it actually is. All things aside, the game does a great job of making a fun little world that branches out into a much bigger, much more dangerous world to explore. It's just really interesting. And it also has my absolute favorite minigame in Final Fantasy history, and that is Hot and Cold Chocobo. I love this minigame so much. I would be super okay if they just straight up made like a $30 game where it's just Hot and Cold Chocobo with a little story and like 20 maps or something. I'd waste my time on that like crazy. But yeah, if you can get past the battles and kind of load time being super slow, which, you know, you can now that the game's been re-released with like a fast forward function, then please, by all means, enjoy this game. It's just wonderful. Number 6. Again, if you talked to me 20 years ago when these games were coming out, 10 would never have been this high on the list, because I hated FF10 when it came out. I hated it. That being said, now I really enjoy it. There's still things I really don't like about it, and that is not so much its story, but I don't like its characters very much. I'm not a fan of Titus. I'm not a fan of Yuna. I hate Auron. I think he's super annoying. I don't like Riku. The only character I really like is Waka. I didn't even mention Kimari because he's not a character. He's a plank of wood. But the funny part is like, even though I don't like a lot of these characters, I like so much about what they go through. I love Titus and Jecht. I love the way they go through what they go through. I love Waka battling with his faith. I love that so much. So a lot of the problems I once had with this game, I've kind of grown into liking it a lot. The game has a gorgeous aesthetic, as much as I still hate the way the NPCs look, but everything else is gorgeous. The game is such an improvement over the way 7, 8, and 9 presented the games, with actual fully 3D environments, and the voice acting it used to grate on me, but it doesn't anymore. Now I find it kind of charming. And I said this during FF12, where FF12 had a character, the main character wasn't the main character of the story, but did it poorly. 10's the game that did it right. Titus, for the most part, is not the main character of the story. He has his own arc, and he's definitely important to the story, and he has a major role to play, and he has a lot at stake, what with Jecht being Sin and all. But the main character is Yuna. Yuna is the catalyst for everything in the story. I mean, I guess you could say Sin is, but whatever. The difference is, Titus is made to be the player. He's not from this world, everything's explained to him, it's done perfectly. That's why you play through the game in the eyes of Titus, because you are this visitor to this world that you don't know anything about, so that's why it's so important. If you were Yuna and you saw everything from Yuna's thing, it wouldn't be a surprise when you learn that Yuna's supposed to die at the end, that's what happens with summoners, that all these things with Braska and Seymour, blah, blah. But playing it through Titus's eyes changes the dynamic of the way the story is told, and that's incredibly clever. And that's something that I found 12 didn't do at all. But 10 does it really, really well. And that's from a guy who, again, doesn't like Titus. I think he's a whiny prick. But I love his journey through Final Fantasy X's story. I think the game, by the end of the game, has a few problems with how incredibly powerful your characters can get and how overpowered the optional bosses can get. Like, Penance, for example, is a stupid boss. I never beat him legitimately. I used Yojimbo and just paid him money and killed him. But like the fact that he has like 10 million HP, like this is where Square I think gets really stupid with their optional bosses and their post-game stuff, where it's more about like, how much shit can you endure, more than, hey, how good are you at this game? How good are you at figuring out the mechanics of this game to overpower an enemy? It's how long can you do 99999 damage and live? Like, who cares? But that being said, 10 is a very polarizing game for me, but it's absolutely, of course, worth playing. It's got a great little love story. I think it's my wife's favorite other than 8. She loves the love story in that. And if you're a hopeless romantic, this is actually a pretty good one for you. So, because there's a lot to like with Yuna and Titus's love story. It's a game that really sucked me in more the more I played it. Just do yourself a favor, don't play 10 too. Number 5. Number 5 is Final Fantasy VII. I'm sorry. Please don't be angry at me. Everyone's already left, I bet. Yeah, Final Fantasy VII, unfortunately, is a lower grade than I think most people would put on their top 10. And I think Final Fantasy VII is really good. I had that whole thing where it first came out and I really enjoyed it, and then I got into a period of my life where I was like, Final Fantasy VII is overrated. 10 years ago, I got back into, no, Final Fantasy VII is actually really good. It's just, in my opinion, there's better Final Fantasies than that. But one thing I will say about Final Fantasy VII is that it's definitely one of the most layered Final Fantasy games. There's so much to it. There's so many great characters and great character moments in this. Cloud is a surprisingly layered main character who goes from this super sure of himself soldier to this kind of broken man, and it's super well done. Its translation, for its time, was a little muddy, but I think they actually did a fairly good job, especially compared to a lot of the earlier Final Fantasy games, so good job on them. It's not much of a looker now, even though those pre-rendered backgrounds were really impressive, but it looks blocky and janky, and the people who love Final Fantasy VII, kudos to you for getting over those graphics, because a lot of people nowadays can't get over those types of graphics. Its soundtrack is phenomenal. Like I said, its story with a group of rebels taking on this corporation, only to find out that it's something much bigger than they are, is super great. There's a lot of heartfelt moments in this game that, again, I don't think come out super well because of kind of how not great the game looks, and it's so early in PlayStation 1 times that one of the reasons why I'm so excited for the remake is to see these incredibly heartfelt moments be redone in a way that the game sort of deserves. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII is an amazing game, and one that I've played so many times that I understand why it's so popular. While, again, not my favorite Final Fantasy game, it's an impressive game that stands the test of time, absolutely. Number 4. All series start somewhere, and Final Fantasy started with Final Fantasy. Yeah, I know I'm putting Final Fantasy 1 on top of Final Fantasy 7, and that's because I'm being very specific here. I'm talking about the PSP remake of Final Fantasy 1. It's an extremely simple Final Fantasy. You choose 4 characters from 6 classes, you go on a very small quest, and it's super tiny for what Final Fantasy has become later on. It's that lack of complications that makes this game just simple to enjoy. It's a very good pick up and play RPG that I find myself playing it at least like once every year or 2 years. Again, it's not deep, it doesn't have much going for plot, it has nothing going for character, but it's a fun RPG. And if I was to sit in the room and choose between Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 7 just play right now, I'm probably going to play Final Fantasy 1. But again, that is the PSP version of the game. The original NES version is a slog to play through, and if there wasn't a PSP version, and it was just the Game Boy Advance Dawn of Souls edition, this wouldn't be nearly as high as it is. Number 3. Final Fantasy VIII is the red-headed stepchild of Final Fantasy games. It's a hot mess. A complete garbage fire, and I absolutely adore it. It's also definitely one of the most divisive Final Fantasy games. I've heard people who are like, this is my favorite Final Fantasy, everything about it's amazing, to people who literally hate everything about it, from the characters to the look to the story, and I don't blame either side. It's so wonky, and half of it feels like they just kind of made it up on the spot in like an interview or during a lunchtime. It's so inconsistent in its tone and its setting. It's crazy. But for some reason, I absolutely adore it. I love the characters. I love Squall and his transition from lone wolf asshole to someone who opens up and gives a shit about people. Renoa's not one of my favorite Final Fantasy girls, but even she really just grows on you. You get Zell, you got Cypher, who's just one of the best Final Fantasy villains ever. Laguna is one of the unsung heroes of Final Fantasy games. No one ever talks about Laguna, even when they're talking about Final Fantasy VIII, but he's like one of the best characters in FF in general. And I even like the junctioning system. I know that's really weird because no one likes the junctioning system. It basically makes leveling up entirely useless, but it's all about magic, inventory placement, and other things. I really enjoy it for some reason. My opinion, the way I always say it is, if you go play FF8 and you've never played it before, whenever you change the disc, the game gets 30% wackier. The game begins and you're just like, I'm Squall, I'm part of a military school, and that's like sort of realistic, kind of, so okay. And there's magic in this world, okay, well it's a Final Fantasy. And then like, you switch discs and now it's like, now you're underneath the ground in a prison and there's weird Moombas and this happens, and the disc changes again, you're just like, let's go to the moon! It's like, what? And it's so bonkers. I don't care. FF8 is a mess. Everyone can agree on one thing, and that's Triple Triad. It's friggin' awesome. Number 2. What can I say about Final Fantasy VI that hasn't been said by a million other people? FF6 is one of the swan songs of the Super Nintendo. One of not just the best 16-bit JRPGs, but one of the best 16-bit games ever created. It's filled with heart, with soul, with humor, with love and romance, with indecision and anxiety. Its story is so multi-layered and just filled with different facets of character development and character emotions that it's hard to say anything negative about Final Fantasy VI. Following the story of Terra, learning about her powers and learning where she belongs in this world, and characters that join her like Locke and Edgar and Celis, there's just such an amazing appeal to this game. Every character is totally unique in both the way they fight and who they are in the story. The game branches off into different little miniature stories that become something much bigger than the characters and the players themselves. It's just an impressive Final Fantasy game too. So much is thrown into a 16-bit cartridge for the Super NES that I actually can't believe some of this actually fit on there. Some of the best set pieces in any RPG are in this game, and again, I can't believe they pulled it off. And I mean, for God's sakes, you can suplex a train. Who doesn't want to do that? I won't go into spoilers about other things that make this game amazing, but it does something that no other Final Fantasy have the balls to do. While it's not my favorite Final Fantasy game, there's still one left, I will say that this is probably the best Final Fantasy. If you were to choose one Final Fantasy to play and you've never played a Final Fantasy game, it's this one. FF6 perfects the formula in an incredible way that deserves to be played. Number 1. Final Fantasy IV may not be as flashy as some of the later games in the series, and it might not be as long as Final Fantasy VI or VII, and it might not be as complex as games like Final Fantasy VIII and XII. In fact, Final Fantasy IV is actually quite a basic, simple, short RPG. But man, does it pack it in with an amazing story and a great cast of characters. With FF1 and 3 not having really a main cast of characters, and FF2 not doing a super great job of it, FF4 was really the first Final Fantasy game with personality and charm in your party. Cecil being a Dark Knight, going through life wondering if what he does is right, is morally just. Kain, his best friend with kind of a chip on his shoulder. His love, Rosa. There's so many great characters that Cecil surrounds himself with. And they're all just great characters that are like sort of down to earth. Like, this is kind of weird because this is a very melodramatic game. A lot of big things happen. I mean, a lot of big things, especially so early in the Final Fantasy's life. But the characters, they feel real. These feel like real people that you're traveling the world with. You feel super close to them. Now, mind you, I'm talking about the re-release of Final Fantasy IV. The original version for the Super Nintendo is awfully translated. It's just a terrible translation and is probably not worth playing unless you're like me and you kind of like consider yourself a bit of a game historian in that sense. The version you want to play is Final Fantasy IV Complete for PSP. Doesn't change too much, has beautiful 2D graphics, and it has an amazing retranslation of the story. And through this translation, you really feel the heart and personality that these characters really, really have. You care about everything that happens to each of them. I don't think there's a bad one in the bunch. Everyone says, oh, I don't know, what about Edward? No, I like Edward. I like every character in this game. I like Kain's arc, where he really finds who he is. I mean, that's kind of the theme of this game. It's all about redemption, there's love, but there's also just a lot of self-discovery with a lot of the characters and the responsibilities they have in the world that they inhabit. It's hard to explain too much without going into spoiler territory because, like I said, a lot of things happen in this game in a short period of time. But every key moment feels really important to what's happening to these characters. There's not like a wasted section. Like a lot of games have the padding and filling, where just here's a little extra dungeon for no reason. And this game I don't feel has that. Every dungeon leads to a major specific part of the story and really leads somewhere. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe this isn't as well put together as Final Fantasy VI, and it's not gonna be remembered as being the mainstream game that brought everyone in like Final Fantasy VII. But Final Fantasy IV has heart and emotion that I don't think any other Final Fantasy game really has in such a small package. And that is why Final Fantasy IV is my favorite Final Fantasy game. So there you have it. Those are my top 10 favorite Final Fantasy games in the mainline Final Fantasy games. Tell me what yours is in the comments below. You might have noticed that Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy III did not make it on this list, so that says something right there. But that is it for today. I'm Phil in the Blanks, and I'll see you guys next level.